There's a moment in Adventure Time that I genuinely believe is one of the most devastating things ever put into a children's cartoon. It's not a battle, it's not a death, it's not some big climactic moment with a swelling orchestra, it's just a man sitting alone, holding a piece of paper, singing to a little girl who can no longer remember him. And if you've seen it, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. But here's the thing. To fully understand why that moment hits the way it does, you have to understand the entire journey that leads up to it. Because Simon Petrikov's story isn't just a sad backstory they slapped onto a goofy villain to make him more interesting. It's a slow, meticulous, heartbreaking portrait of what happens when someone sacrifices everything they are to protect the people they love, and what's left when there's nothing of them left to give. So today I want to make the case that Simon Petrikov is not just one of the most tragic characters in Adventure Time. He is one of the most tragic characters in the history of animation. Full stop. Bold claim, I know. Let's get into it. Let's start at the beginning, the real beginning, before the Ice King, before the crown, before any of it. Simon Petrikov was a scholar, an antiquarian specifically, someone who studies and collects ancient artifacts, and by all accounts, this guy had a genuinely beautiful life ahead of him. He was intelligent, kind, a little nerdy in the best way possible. And then he met Betty. Now I want to stop here because this is something the show doesn't linger on for very long, but it matters enormously. Simon and Betty were in love, genuinely, deeply in love, the kind of love that makes someone feel like they've finally found the one piece of the world that was made specifically for them. And when you understand that, when you hold on to that image of Simon as this warm, happy, fulfilled human being, everything that comes after hits about 10 times harder. He was not always broken. He was not always sad. He had something real. He had everything. And then he found the crown. The Enchiridion arc, the slow backstory reveals across seasons, and most importantly, the episode Holly Jolly Secrets. This is where the show first cracks the Ice King open and shows us what's underneath. And what's underneath is not a villain at all. It's a video diary. A man recording himself as he slowly loses his mind, desperately trying to document what's happening to him before he forgets it entirely. I think I may be losing my mind. That line, the way he says it, it's not dramatic, it's not theatrical, it's terrified. It's a man who is acutely, painfully aware of what is being taken from him and is powerless to stop it. And here's what makes this so devastating from a psychological standpoint. Simon didn't put on that crown out of ambition. He wasn't chasing power. He wasn't trying to become something greater. He put it on as a joke. Essentially, he found a strange artifact and tried it on, and in that single impulsive moment, his entire life was derailed. There was no grand choice, there was no moment of corruption. There was just a man curious about a weird old hat, and then everything was gone. That randomness is what makes it so cruel. Now, here's where the show does something genuinely brilliant, because most stories about identity loss, whether in film, television, literature, I follow a kind of dramatic arc. The character fights the transformation, they resist, they have big emotional moments of clarity where they reclaim themselves before ultimately losing the battle. It's structured, it's cinematic, it gives the audience catharsis. Simon's deterioration doesn't do that. It's quiet, it's incremental, and the show reveals it to us out of sequence, meaning we've already spent 2 entire seasons laughing at the Ice King before we ever understand what he actually is. That's not an accident. That is the show asking you to sit with something deeply uncomfortable because you laughed at him. I laughed at him. We all did. He was bumbling and pathetic and weird, and we found that funny. And then Holly Jolly Secrets plays, and you have to retroactively reframe every single moment you spent finding him ridiculous, because now you know that underneath the ice magic and the kidnapped princesses and the obnoxious laugh, there is just a man who doesn't know who he is anymore. A man who lost his name, lost his love, lost his future, and on some level lost his past too, because the memories fade just like everything else. Let me talk about Marceline for a second, because this is essential. The show reveals across multiple episodes that Simon and Marceline had a relationship during the Mushroom War. After the bombs fell and civilization collapsed, a little half-demon girl was wandering alone through the ruins, and Simon found her. Or maybe she found him, and for a period of time that we never fully see in its entirety, he took care of her. Now think about that for a moment. The crown is already doing its damage at this point. Simon is already starting to lose himself. He has moments of clarity clarity, and then moments where the crown takes over and he becomes erratic, violent, terrifying. And yet in every lucid moment, his priority was her. This child who had nothing. This kid who was completely alone in a world that had just ended. He sang her a song about a little guy who lived on a pickle jar. He called her his princess. He found her a stuffed toy and told her its name was Hambo. He was, in every meaningful way, her father figure during the most terrifying period of her incredibly long life. And then he had to leave because he knew the crown was winning. He knew that staying would eventually mean hurting her. And so the most loving thing he could do was walk away while he was still lucid enough to make that decision. I can feel myself slipping, Marceline. I'm so sorry. The man chose to lose himself alone rather than risk losing himself in front of her. That is not the action of a villain. That is the action of someone who loves another person more than they love their own existence. Which brings us to I Remember You, Season 4, Episode 25, written by Rebecca Sugar. And I will die on the hill that this is the single most emotionally sophisticated episode of Adventure Time, and possibly one of the greatest single episodes of any animated series ever made. If you haven't seen it, here's what happens. The Ice King goes to Marceline. He wants her to help him write a song. He has all these old papers, notes, scraps, and he can't quite figure out what to do with them. And as the episode goes on, Marceline begins to realize, and we begin to realize, that these papers are Simon's. They're the last remnants of the man he used to be, stuffed chaotically into a scrapbook he no longer has the clarity to understand. He doesn't know what they mean. He doesn't know they're his. He doesn't know who Simon Petrikov is, but Marceline does. And the gut punch of this episode, the moment that I think genuinely earns the title of most tragic moment in cartoon history, is that the Ice King has no idea why Marceline is upset. He has no memory of being her Simon. He has no idea why she keeps looking at him with that specific kind of grief that you only have for someone you loved who is still technically standing in front of you. He just wants to write a song. He just wants a friend. He doesn't understand why it hurts her so much to be around him. That line right there. Because he's not talking about the song anymore, is he? He's talking about everything. He has this overwhelming sensation of loss and longing, and he cannot locate the source of it because the source has been buried under 1,000 years of magical deterioration. He knows something is missing. He has always known something is missing. He just can't find it anymore. And Marceline, who has 1,000 years of memories with him and without him, has to stand there and look at what remains and figure out how to love someone who is no longer who they were. That is not a cartoon problem. That is one of the most human problems in existence. Anyone who has watched someone they love disappear into illness, whether physical, neurological, psychological, knows exactly what Marceline feels in that room. The grief of mourning someone who is still alive. The bizarre cruelty of presence without recognition. The show asked a children's cartoon to carry that weight, and it did. Now here's where I want to make my actual argument, because I said Simon is the most tragic character in cartoon history, and I want to be precise about why. Because tragic is a word we throw around a lot. A lot of animated characters have sad backstories. A lot of them suffer. A lot of them lose people. That's not the same thing as tragedy in the classical sense. Tragedy, in the way the ancient Greeks originally meant it, is about the destruction of something good through a combination of circumstance and a fundamental, unchangeable truth about who someone is. Simon's tragedy is not just that bad things happened to him. His tragedy is that he was destroyed by the very thing that defined him. He was a man who devoted his life to finding and preserving ancient knowledge, and the ancient artifact he found destroyed him. His curiosity, his scholarly instinct, the core of his identity as someone who seeks out old, powerful things, that is what led him to the crown. He was not corrupted by greed. He was not brought low by arrogance. He was destroyed by who he was, by the thing that made him good and interesting and himself. And then the show adds one final layer, one that I think goes criminally under-discussed. Simon didn't just lose himself, he lost himself while still being useful. The crown gave him power. During the Mushroom War, that power protected Marceline. It kept her alive. The thing killing him was simultaneously the thing saving her. He was literally being consumed by the very act of protecting someone he loved. There is no win condition there. there. There's no version of that story where Simon Petrikov gets to be okay. And that's what I keep coming back to when people say Adventure Time is just a kid's show. Because yes, it is also a kid's show. It has a funny dog and a kid in a hat and a candy kingdom and all of that. But embedded inside all of that absurdity, the writers made a decision to tell the story of a man whose love cost him everything, and they told it with more restraint and more grace than most live-action dramas ever manage. The Ice King isn't scary. He's barely even a villain in any real sense. He's a lonely, confused old man who kidnaps princesses because some fractured remnant of his subconscious remembers that he was supposed to find a princess. He's not even sure why he does what he does. He just does it compulsively because the crown took his mind, but left behind this hollow echo of an intention he can no longer trace back to its source. He is looking for Betty. He has always been looking for Betty. He just doesn't know that anymore. I want to end on something a bit more reflective, because this video isn't really just about Adventure Time. Simon Petrikov resonates the way he does because his story is, underneath all the magic and mythology, a story about what it means to give yourself away completely, about the price of selflessness taken to its absolute limit, about the terrifying possibility that you can love someone so much, sacrifice so much, pour so much of yourself into protecting them, and still lose yourself entirely in the process. And I think a lot of people carry a version of that fear. The fear of waking up one day and not recognizing who you've become, of looking in the mirror and finding that somewhere along the way, in the process of surviving and giving and adapting, the person you used to be quietly left without saying goodbye. Simon Petrikov never got to say goodbye to himself. He didn't get a meaningful final moment of clarity where he looked in the mirror and understood what was happening. He just slowly became someone else, and that someone else has lived for 1,000 years not knowing what was lost. That's the thing about I Remember You that never stops hurting no matter how many times you watch it. It's not about the Ice King, it's about Simon. And Simon isn't there. He hasn't been there for a very, very long time, but Marceline remembers him. She remembers all of it. And in some ways that makes it worse. If you made it to the end of this video, genuinely thank you. Leave a like if this hit you the way I hoped it would. Subscribe if you're new, because I will do these character breakdowns all the time.